Today's episode of Socially Democratic is presented to you by Dun Street. Dun Street partners with businesses, organisations, unions and social democratic parties across the globe to train leaders, develop community organising and engagement strategies and empower people to organise for change. And in 2021, and it's our birthday today, happy birthday Dun Street. Dun Street will continue to work with folks who want to make a difference, inspire, give hope and enable leadership to achieve their shared purpose. To find out how you can partner with Dun Street, hit us up at dunstreet.com.au. And we've also got a new sponsor for the podcast. Socially Democratic is also presented to you by Maurice Blackburn Lawyers. We're very pleased to be in a partnership with Maurice Blackburn Lawyers, a great firm. And in fact, they are looking for some people to come and work for them right now. So if you're passionate about working in the law and providing access to justice, Maurice Blackburn, Australia's leading plaintiff law firm, is looking for a paralegal to join their class action team. Learn from a highly successful, collaborative and skilled team in an engaging culture and a supportive environment. The role's based in Brisbane. And to apply, go to mauriceblackburn.com.au/careers. So be part of change and fight for fair. Apply now. Hello and welcome to another episode of Socially Democratic, your weekly centre-left political and cultural podcast that dives into the progressive issues of the day and the people leading them from home and abroad. And today I'm joined by the National Director for Democracy in Colour, Néha Madhok. And Néha is going to talk to us about the work that Democracy in Colour do. They focus a lot of their energies into community organising for people of colour and First Nations across the country on a whole bunch of campaigns around migration, criminal justice, and stuff around the media as well. And I had a great chat to Néha today about all the work that they're doing. Could have went for a while. I had to wrap it up eventually because we had our hour, but check it out today. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher and Amazon. And if you're an Apple Podcast user, please leave us a rating and a review. And for all of the most recent updates, follow Dun Street on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and LinkedIn. Let's get to today's episode. We're taping this one on a Thursday afternoon on the land of the Wurundjeri people in downtown Melbourne, and joining me on the line from Adelaide, and I'm going to guess that is Ghana country from memory.
That is Ghana country, yes.
Look at that. Who's been to a couple of Labor Party branch meetings in South Australia? This guy. Is the Director for Democracy in Colour, Néha Madhok. Welcome to Socially Democratic.
Thank you. Long-time listener, first-time guest.
Look at that. It pays off, see?
It does.
Now, we've been trying to get you on the show for a while now, so it's great that you finally came on. And normally you'd like to do an episode where you can try and hit a sweet spot when things are popping up in the media and jump on topics. But Democracy in Colour does a lot of good work. And I feel like issues seem to happen in the media a lot when it comes to the rights of people of colour in this country. So unfortunately, it's actually there's always a good time, really, because there's always issues.
There's always something, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And we're going to talk a lot about the work that you do and the work that Democracy in Colour does in the community. But before we do that, for the folks at home, I'd like to know more about you and your journey on the way that led you to working for Democracy in Colour. And I know that you've been coached in public narrative by the great man Marshall Gance. So I'm going to be judging your story of self here to make sure that touches all the key points. No, how did you come to be working here? What's going on?
Yeah, so I mean, it all really starts at the very beginning, doesn't it, with these things? For me, I think it really starts when my parents landed at Sydney Airport on a plane from India via Malaysia or Singapore, because I don't know if you can fly direct, with me as a little bundle in their arms on, I think it was the Queen's birthday public holiday, in fact. And we went off and we had a little flat in Dulwich Hill, which we could actually afford to live on the dole. We were on the dole. We had access to Medicare. My mum went to TAFE. My dad went out and looked for work that was often cash in hand. My parents are trained in as engineers and as a teacher, but my mum's qualifications weren't recognised, so she had to retrain. And my dad just wasn't able to find work because people didn't want someone who didn't have Australian experience. So that didn't stop him. He went out and found ways to still work. He worked as a mechanic's assistant and all sorts of stuff that he was definitely overqualified for, but he did it because it brought in the cash. And he experienced a lot of racism in that context. Like, he was called all sorts of like awful slurs, but he did it to put food on the table, and that's an unfortunate reality for many people still today. Now, the thing that really changed our lives was the fact that Dad managed to get a job in the public service. He managed to get a job at Sydney Water, nice, safe, stable public service job. And that meant that we could buy a house, a secondhand car, move out into the suburbs, and have a backyard for me to play around in. And that's all my parents wanted. I think that's what most people want, right? So I grew up out in southwest Sydney in the suburbs of Macquarie Fields and Ingleburn, where we were one of the first immigrant families on our street. And that led to people knocking on our door and asking us all sorts of what I would consider really outrageous questions, like the neighbours who knocked on our door and asked us if we were Muslim on the day after 9/11. Or people who would ask us really inappropriate questions about the customs that we celebrated. But my parents always ran with it. They always saw it as an opportunity to build connection and to build community. And so they actually put a lot of work into being friendly with our neighbours, actually. But I went to the local public schools, and I learned a lot about class and race in that time. I learnt about the way that people in public housing were treated. I saw the way that the teachers treated those kids differently. I saw how the teachers treated the Aboriginal kids differently. And I saw how the teachers treated me differently. And I remember thinking, even then, how unfair that was. But it wasn't until I remember being at home. I must have been like 8 or 9 years old. And this red-headed woman comes on the television, and she's shouting and, carrying on. She's got this awful grating voice. And every time she would come on the TV, my parents, they would kind of tense up and they would kind of like talk to each other in this like stressed way. And I couldn't really understand what they were talking about because the concepts were just beyond me. But I knew that whenever she came along and then the guy with the bushy eyebrows came along, things were not good. Someone was stressed. And I didn't entirely understand why. And so I asked, well, what's going on? Why? What does this mean? And my mum said, we might have to go back. And I was like, what do you mean we might have to go back? She said, well, we might have to go. Like, in other countries, when people talk the way that she's talking, it means that you have to leave. And it just felt like everything changed for me in that moment. Like, my heart just dropped out of my body because this was the only place I'd ever known. This was my home. And the thought that this like angry person on the TV could tell me what my home was and where I could go and where I belonged just made me so mad. And it made me scared. And I didn't know what I wanted to do about it, but I knew I wanted to do something. And I knew that I wouldn't let her or anyone else like her dictate that for me. And so I remember the next few days seeing more and more Australian flags go up around our suburb and thinking, I used to like these. I used to think that this just meant that we were all proud of our home and we just liked where we lived. And now they felt much more sinister. And even today, I see an Australian flag and I don't think that we are one or that we are a united nation. I think that this person who has this flag wants to cause division and they're making a statement. And so, it's a long journey from there on to working at Democracy in Colour, but the long story short is I went to UTS. I got involved in student politics, like I'm sure many of your listeners have in their uni days, so I don't need to go into too much detail about that. Went off and worked for unions and politicians and climate change organisations. But one thing I always felt in all of those spaces was that race was invisible to progressives. They didn't want to talk about it. Or even worse, somehow the more left-wing you were, the whiter your spaces became. And I didn't understand why that was either. And so when the opportunity to volunteer to start up this organisation came along, I just jumped because I thought this is exactly what we need.
Thank you very much for sharing that. And two follow-up questions. One more a clarification than the question. The redhead on the television screaming and yelling, I'm assuming that was Pauline Hanson, not Rhonda Birch.
That sure is.
Not Rhonda Birchmore.
No.
And the second one is, I think a lot of Labor Party listeners who have done door knocking will certainly recognise this, is that when you knock on a door and there is an Australian flag out the front of the house, you're sort of like, this could go either way, really, couldn't it? Which is ridiculous to think about, isn't it?
In fact, when I used to door knock, I would ask someone else to door knock those doors, especially when we were in certain electorates. It really depended on where you were.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm with you on this one. I think a lot of Labor Party people broadly, or people on the left, are very sort of have similar views about the Australian flag as a symbol for national identity. I think a lot of us would like to see that flag changed. But it's ridiculous, isn't it, when a national symbol that we all should have some ownership over can then become a symbol for division, which is...
Yeah, it makes me so angry the way that the far right have, like across the world, taken national flags and just turned them into these fascist symbols.
Bizarre. All right, Democracy in Colour. Talk to us about Democracy in Colour. What's its purpose? How did it get started?
Yeah, so it started like many things do as an idea in 2016 after we saw the rise of Trump. We saw, federal elections here that I think didn't go too well for any progressive. Brexit, the election of Modi, the election of Bolsonaro. We just saw the far right and nationalism in particular, like a scary, toxic type of nationalism, taking hold across the world. And it's taking hold because neoliberalism is unsustainable. But of course, if you are, if your interests are in creating more wealth, you don't want working people to be fighting back. You want working people to be divided and fighting amongst themselves. So of course, they turn to the age-old race division tactic. And so the way that we kind of put it really is that white supremacy and capitalism are killing us. They are eroding our dignity. They're stripping us of opportunities. They're dehumanizing us. They're marginalizing people of color and then the various communities within people of color. They're excluding working people and people of color from decision-making. We're being denied basic services. And for those of us, particularly who have been colonized, there's a lot of intergenerational trauma. And so we believe that by building the power of communities of color through centering lived experience, through a really deep focus on community organizing, we're able to build the solutions where impacted communities can actually self-determine how they change their lives. And so we do that in a few ways, community organizing being a key component of it. But we also run trainings that are a bit more, you do the training program and then you can choose to do what you would like afterwards. And then we also do sort of rapid response digital campaigning work as well.
When you're setting up Democracy in Colour and you think about your constituency of people of colour, that's a pretty big constituency.
That's a big one, yeah.
Yeah. Talk me through the thought process in that. I'm not assuming that it's exclusionary. I'm sure that any person of colour in Australia can be involved, and you seek to organise and empower those people. But talk us through about who are your target communities that you are seeking to try and organise and empower them.
Yeah, and it's a great question to be asking me today, because we have through our team planning process today, been spending a lot of time actually talking through our constituency, because the thing that we don't want to do is flatten the experience of all people of colour. You can't. And it also just perpetuates the problems, right? That there's like white supremacy, and then there's people of colour, and there's First Nations people, and that's it. Whereas it's far more complex than that. And so our base, our core constituency, when it comes to like the people who are actually currently doing the work, we would say are generally quite progressive, young, second or third generation people of colour, with a few first generation migrants in there. But they're the sort of people, like in any progressive organisation, they're the people who are kind of already on board, who are generally quite values aligned and willing to step up and do the work. And then there's the people who we need to work really hard to, from our own organising perspective, to like do more with. And they are people who've got the lived experience of migration. So that might be your first generation migrant, people on temporary visas like international students, people who are farm workers, or other temporary visa holder worker. There are so many visas out there. And it can also include people seeking asylum and refugees, as well as, I guess, the people who we sort of in shorthand would refer to as our parents, the sort of people who have come as first generation migrants, some maybe 20, 30 years ago, and of course the people who are coming across now as well, who for very many reasons may be a little bit more conservative, but not necessarily conservative in the sense of like left or right in the way that we in the West think about it, but more conservative in the sense of like, for many, their economic interests are actually quite progressive and quite left-wing in that sense. There might be. For many others, they're quite right-wing for other reasons of where they've come from, or their own experiences with socialism, for example. But often we find that their immediate interests align with the left. But their other interests may not, where they adopt this idea of assimilation, or adopt this idea of just put your head down and work hard, and then you can make it and have this Australian dream as well. And I mean, it makes sense. Like when you've uprooted your entire life, moved somewhere else, and you've done that for a better life, why wouldn't you behave in that way? And so that's also a big part of what we're doing, is figuring out like, how do we align our interests across these very varied experiences of people of colour? How do we create that solidarity and that sense of collective alignment? We don't know what that looks like yet, but at the very least, we've figured out that that's pretty integral to winning.
And community organising and the practice of community organising plays such an important role in that work, right? Trying
Absolutely,
to find that shared purpose among such a diverse group within a broader constituency is critical. Talk to me about the types of community organising that Democracy in Colour have embraced in recent campaigns, and what are you guys looking towards in the future?
Yeah, it's interesting because we're a startup, and we've really been operational for about 3 or 4 years, really. Before that, we were just kind of a Facebook page and a couple of young people who would call each other on the phone. And so often for the first couple of years, our campaigns were really reactive, and it was just like the leader of the Victorian Liberal Party is being absolutely outrageous and saying all these awful racialized things about the South Sudanese community in the lead up to the Victorian state election 2018. So we're going to fight back and create a stronger than fear campaign. And that really was just mobilizing. It was telling people, hey, this is what's going on. Come out and door knock with us. Come out and make phone calls. Let's do something about it. And people in Victoria were pretty cheesed off. as we then saw in the election result as well, people didn't buy it. And so there was a lot of energy there. And then similarly around the federal election, around the Yes campaign. But what we've kind of decided is that we can't keep operating that way. We can't just keep mobilizing and trying to push out at these moments in this really reactive way, because we're not going to actually achieve the change that we need. We get these little short-term wins. We get this, like, if you attack us, we will emerge and we will come, and like you can't just do that. But what we need is to prevent this from happening in the first place. We just need our dignity and humanity recognized, which sounds so simple, but unfortunately it's not the case. And so what that means is that we are choosing to invest really deeply in a decentralized community organizing style, in a way that that isn't about democracy in color, which I think is so interesting for so many organizations to think about, right? Like, it's not important for us, for our people in Western Sydney to be walking around in democracy in color t-shirts, but it is important for us that they are talking to us and that we are talking to them, and that together we're getting one another's needs met. And so it's interesting because there's so many different ways that people talk about it. They're like deep organizing, community organizing, functional organizing, distributed organizing, and it's kind of like bits and pieces of all of it, right? Like we use some of the, I don't know, I like to think of it as the flavors of some of the GAN's organizing model, where we set norms, we talk about decision making, we talk about constituency, we have a clear strategy when it comes to theory of change and mission. We have team leaders, and then we have a real clear sense of where people sit. But then also we want to decentralize that. And so we want that snowflake, or those many, many, many snowflakes, to grow across the country. And we want to make sure that the decision making is in the hands of those leaders, and that they're coming back to us and saying, this is what we need democracy in color to do. And we're almost just facilitating a lot of that process. And I mean, for any organizer out there, it's so simple to just say, well, organizing is about give and take. But for many people who are not organizers and who have to deal with organizers, they would, I just know, I've worked with those people. I find it so frustrating. What do you mean it's about give and take? Why won't they just do the thing that we've all agreed is the strategy and just go out there and make it happen? But I mean, we're not the experts. Like I'm a spokesperson, a figurehead. I'm lucky enough to spend my time thinking about this a lot, but it's the people out there who are on their temporary visas, who haven't had the opportunities that I had as a young person. Like, they don't have access to Social Security, they don't have access to Medicare, they don't have access to TAFE. Those are the people now who really need to be leading this work.
You may not have begun that journey, but I mean, I'm interested to get a sense of how is that going so far, or if it hasn't begun, then what are your expectations as you move into 2021?
Yeah, so so much of our work is finding ways to make money so that we can hire more staff. And last year we hired an organising director, which is honestly the best thing I think we're going to do for this organisation for a while. And she's now really got the capacity to go out into community and start talking to people. So she's already connected with some of the sort of key groups out there that we know are values aligned, have lived experience, and most importantly, there's already some trust and relationship there. And so she goes out into various suburbs of Melbourne where she lives, and has community consultations. She talks to people face to face, on the phone. Similarly with our existing teams as well, like making sure that our volunteer organisers are aligned with what's going on in the community, and there's like a back and forth. So, for instance, she spent a couple of months pulling together a campaign plan for our next organising campaign. staff have had a look at it, the key volunteers have had a look at it, and it was based on community consultation. But then she took it back to the community and they were like, well, actually, these things need to change, and I actually don't agree with this and this and this and this. And so we had to go back and make those changes, fix up that alignment. So it takes longer. It takes longer than your traditional campaign where you just kind of come up with a strategy, make it look pretty, you announce it, you do a launch event, you're out the door. But by the time we do launch, we will already have established leaders. We will have established support out there in the community where the people who are affected by this have heard about what's happening. They'll have some trust in us, and ideally be ready to hit the ground running. And so while the groundwork can take a lot longer, I think it'll really pay off in the long term.
That's so cool, and I mean, I love that point you made about, you know, you've developed a strategy, you take it out to the community, and they come back with feedback. I mean, you know, we have to keep on reminding ourselves that strategizing is actually a verb. That means it's constantly happening.
Yeah, exactly.
And if you don't get buy-in from your constituency into the strategy, and indeed, if it's even better if they can actually shape it themselves, then you know, then they're going to do it, aren't they? They're less likely to execute tactics that underpin that strategy if they haven't had any role in developing it.
Exactly.
And
that's our long-term. That's our long-term goal, right? Like, instead of having to go out more, those people are actually leading the work, and those people are developing that work themselves as part of the broader Democracy in Colour network.
That's cool. I'm not quoting you here, but I'm certainly quoting some language off of your website that I found was both courageous in saying this and honest. But I identify with it, and it's I think you're talking about organising. It says our movements, so plural, are not powerful enough. We rarely reach the scale of people we need to organise, and we have difficulty engaging, impacting communities, and we struggle to build real broad-based constituencies. Want to get your own personal thoughts on that? Why do you think that is?
Yeah, I think so many organisations right now, I think the union movement, I think the climate movement, I think a range of progressives who campaigned really hard in the lead up to the 2019 election are in a bit of a strategy crisis right now. Because so many of us were, I mean, us included, we drank the Kool-Aid too. We're relying on a Labor government being elected who we'd already done all the policy work with and got them over the line on everything, and we just needed them to get elected now. And that didn't work, and so now everyone's kind of going, what happens? What do we do? The Libs are even more powerful. They're even more entrenched now. And I think that demonstrates a range of issues. One being that many of us have been organising according to election cycles, particularly in the not-for-profit space where where so much of your fundraising is just oriented around like 2 to 3 years. And it's so hard to get philanthropists to give really long-term sustained funding. This idea that elections are the way to create change as well, where I think the Labor movement had a real reckoning after Your Rights at Work, and realizing that there was a lot of work that needed to be done after Kevin Rudd's election to hold them to account. And I think as well, there's just a lack of, there's a sense that engaging with some of the constituencies that are either fearful right now or so disengaged that they don't care at all about the political process, that they are in the too hard basket. And by just putting them in the too hard basket, we're not talking to them. And by not talking to them, well, we're not dealing with the issues by, like, for example, organizations that are running campaigns in the sort of like election campaigns in the sort of blue-green seats to try and get like progressive independence up. Or even just like the Labor Green stoushes over the inner city seats of Sydney and Melbourne. Like, I think that these are really easy ways. I mean, they're important in their own ways, but I think that they're easy ways to distract ourselves from actually talking to the people who are listening to people like Trump, who are listening to people like Tony Abbott and going, yeah, he's actually talking to me. and we need to be talking to them.
It's, you've just reminded me of that change in the way that we campaign and organise, and I would even use the word the obsession that organisations had with electoral politics. Because I think sort of like, the Your Rights at Work campaign in 2007 was very, very unique and clearly very successful. I was a union organiser for the TW then at that time, so I remember it vividly, in Adelaide actually. And then, sort of 2013, certainly from the Victorian experience, was the first time that the party invested in grassroots or community or electoral organising, employing field organisers and whatnot, and that's gone through. That's evolved over the years. Fast forward then to the 2018 Victorian state campaign or poll and the 2019 federal, going and voting in a particular target seat. There was about 3,000 people handing out various how to votes, and most of them weren't from political parties. Like, it wasn't just Get Up; it was just unbelievable, and it just hit me. I must have been living in a bubble or something, because I guess when you're doing the work I was doing, I very rarely went to, apart from voting, I was very rarely spending time. And I was like, oh my, what is going on here? And the follow-on effect from that is, even like from a polling standpoint, there's so many groups doing polling in the final week of a campaign that it's completely ridiculous and redundant doing any research, because no one's answering the phone, because everyone from 6 till 10, the phones are ringing off the hook from every bloody organisation trying to do polling, whatever. Electoral organising became the cool thing that everyone invested in. And I don't know why that all of a sudden happened.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I feel like it's so much of it, like, I think part of it is the sort of Americanization of the progressive movement. I feel like we keep trying to learn from the American left, and I think there's a lot of value to learn from them. But they have a completely different political system and very different concepts of politics as well. But I think, like, being so inspired by the Obama campaign, and I think as well, just the way that the marginals were playing out here as well. Like, I'm not surprised, but similar to you, I had that experience where we were, one of our key seats in 2019 election was Banks, which is, I think, like something like 50% multicultural background people live there. It was one of the most marginal seats in the country. And as far as everyone was concerned, there was no reason why it shouldn't go to the Labor Party. And yet, on election day, I remember seeing some of the Liberal posters up, and they were just running that, like, Bill Shorten is a liar line. And I was actually like, if you weren't paying attention, these could actually work. And then the moment I actually knew that Labor wasn't going to win that seat and may not win elsewhere was when I got to one of the schools, and I saw who was handing out for the Liberal Party. It was people from the local Nepalese and broadly South Asian community, people who were local business owners. Like, your takeaway shops had the Liberal call flutes up in their doors. We actually could not go to a takeaway, like a coffee shop or a kebab shop or whatever, that didn't have one of those call flutes up. They were shouting, cheering, and hugging the Liberal MP now, David Coleman, and no one was interested in anything that we had to say. Get Up, the unions, the Labor Party had to say, the Greens. It was almost like a community day out. It was like a family day out, like people handing out with their kids for the Libs, like friends and family were like swapping over. They were sitting on their chairs having tea. Like, it was, I just looked at that and went, the seat's gone. And that's because they actually genuinely engaged with the people who lived there, and they appealed to their interests. I mean, I can only speculate as to why, and I have my hunches why that happened. But the key thing was that they were actually talking to people in that electorate from day dot, and we were just out there. Like, we had like very shiny looking people from the eastern suburbs, we being the progressives, have very shiny looking people from the eastern suburbs of Sydney handing out in a Western Sydney seat, and you can tell this person's not from here. And so no one wanted to talk to them.
So fast forward to today, and you make some really interesting points that I really agree with and I can get around. What lessons have you guys learnt from that, and how is that going to shape your strategy going forward in terms of engaging with migrant communities in those?
So one thing that we're definitely doing is using elections as moments, not as the build up to and the end of a campaign. So the next federal election, whenever it is, later this year, early next year, that'll be a moment, that'll be a peak in our campaign. Certainly, we'll use it as a way to prosecute our issues and get media and do actions, whatever we need to do that's strategic at the time. But we won't be running an intensive marginal seat campaign to try and unseat someone, unless it is genuinely strategic, right? Like, unless it's actually going to lead to the structural change that we are fighting for. But if we're just doing it for the sake of demonstrating power, can we do that in another way? Is there a way that actually appeals to our base? I mean, so many of, when we talk about that constituency as well of ours, many of them can't actually vote. Many of them are not citizens, and that's the problem. It's the problem that they don't have the capacity to execute their voice in that way. And so why would we campaign in a way that is only available to citizens, and that locks out so many of our potential constituency?
Yeah.
Why not find other ways to build power and to demonstrate power? And so that might look like mass mobilization. It might look like nonviolent direct action. It might look like other sort of peaceful marches or gatherings, or whatever we can do. Or it might look like little kind of tactics that target politicians or that target the media. But I don't think that for a constituency where a large portion of the people are unable to vote, I just don't think that's the way that we can demonstrate our power.
Last year was obviously a challenging year for everyone, but in particular, organisations that are trying to organise, and organising does require moments where you can actually physically talk to someone face to face.
It definitely helps.
It definitely helps. How did you guys go through the COVID year, and pick out a couple of the campaigns? I mean, look, so anyone listening to the show right now, jump on the Democracy for Colour website, because there's a bunch of really good campaigns that the guys have been running, and I know that you're starting to re-strategize and work out where you want to go next. But please pick out a couple of campaigns that you found some success in as Marshall would say, under conditions of uncertainty with COVID.
Yes, 2020 was quite the year for us. I'd say I accumulated so much flex that I'm still taking some of it. It's certainly not a year that I or anyone else, I don't think, would want to do again. From a purely clinical organizational point of view, it was a year of a lot of growth for us, and a lot of good things happened in terms of organizing, in terms of volunteering, fundraising, people getting involved. That was great. And then from the more negative side, certainly we just had this federal government who absolutely refused to acknowledge and just give the bare basics to people who are not citizens, and it's just appalling. So let's kind of dial back 1 year to when Scott Morrison is announcing that, yes, we're in a global pandemic, we need to do something about it, here's what's going to happen, blah, blah, blah. JobKeeper, job seeker is going to be rolled out. And one of the, I think there was a Guardian politician asked, and is this only available for citizens, or will non-citizens also be able to access JobKeeper and job seeker? And Scott Morrison immediately says, yep, that's only for citizens and permanent residents. Temporary visa holders go home, which is just one of the most heartless absurd and also just not, I think, very clever things to do in a pandemic. Like, even if you're a heartless person, right? Like telling over 1 million people to just go home, 1 million people who are picking the fruit and vegetables, packing them in warehouses, working in restaurants, who are working in hospitality, aged care, who are often like cleaning hospitals, who are, as we've now seen, working in hotel quarantine, people who are delivery riders. Like, these are the essential workers, supermarket workers, far more essential than those of us who sit and tap around on our computers all day. And you're telling them to go home? That's just, like, that makes no sense. But also it's just a disgusting thing to do to people. And so suddenly 1 million people were left not knowing how they were going to pay rent, how they were going to put food on the table, because unsurprisingly, a lot of these people are paid terribly and are living hand to mouth. And so we immediately just kicked into gear and launched a bunch of rapid response campaigns. And the 2020 was the year of rapid response for us. We thought it would be the year where we finally got proactive in our campaigning and could really start doing some deep organizing. And instead, all we did was jump up and down. Sometimes you just have to. And so but the good thing for us was that we had established some of our structures, some of our teams, so that we could bring people in. We even created new teams on the fly and just let them run and just let them do their thing. And now they're some of our best, like, most proactive teams.
That's great.
So we had sort of a campaign to get JobKeeper and JobSeeker to the 1 million people who were left out. It was run on a federal level, a state level, and a council level. We managed to get almost every state to agree to some level of subsidy so that people were getting some level of essential service. And it's not just us, this is a coalition of groups across the country. And I think that as well, those like existing relationships were so important, because we'd all just jump on Zoom, have a chat, make those decisions together, and then go away and make it happen. We got a whole bunch of councils, again, based on existing relationships, councils who had already agreed to do a lot of support work with refugees and people seeking asylum. The welcoming councils is what they were called, with Welcoming Australia. Again, they were some of the first to sign up for council-led subsidies. But the Libs federally were almost impossible to shift. Managed to get Labor Party across the line as well, except unfortunately not as much. There were some key moments where they could have done more, and hopefully as we grow our power, we can make sure that does happen. And it was also the year of hate speech in the media being absolutely setting itself on fire. Like, we have 3 key areas that we work on. They are hate speech in the media, criminal justice, and migration with dignity. So that sort of first area of things that I talked about would come under migration with dignity. Now, the second area is our Hate Is Not News campaign. And it's one where we believe that ultimately, we need to target the Murdoch Media as the reason why we have so much hate speech, why we have so much, why we have these culture wars, why we have so much negativity in the media and disinformation. And of course, that was the set of newspapers who put out some of the worst, just scare, fear-mongering out there. I mean, we call it sort of corona racism. So there was the stuff that was targeting people of Asian background, and a lot of like grassroots activism popped up around that, which we joined. Our other national director is of East Asian background, and so he did a lot of work there. And then the other set of work was around what media commentators were saying. So we had, we've been trying to get Pauline Hanson, who we all know now I have a personal vendetta with, as does every other person of color in this country. We've been trying to get her off the Today Show for a couple of years. And like any other campaign, sometimes your moment just comes and you've just got to be ready for it. And we were ready. We had pushed out a heap of stuff on socials. We'd had this huge petition going. And when she came out and said something outrageous about those people who were trapped in public housing towers, that was that moment where she just she was off, she was gone, and we won. Same with Sam Newman. It was just, he decided to get a footy show contract just around that time that Black Lives Matter was really taking off and everyone was talking about race. And again, it was just a great opportunity to get this awful man off the television and make sure that he didn't succeed in spreading more lies and hate. So while our big target was Murdoch, Channel 9 was actually the one where we actually got our wins last year.
It's remarkable how long Sam Newman managed to stay on mainstream TV over the years, when you think about it.
The disinformation he was spreading last year as well was just awful. So irresponsible.
I'm really going to try and not do a rant on the media because I did it a couple of weeks ago with Andrea Carson from the Media and Journalism Department at La Trobe University. But I mean, the mainstream media really has to own up to their sins of the past when it comes to normalising Pauline Hanson. I mean, politically, she was dead in the water. Like she lost.
She was.
Her party got deregistered. I think did she go to prison or?
Yeah, she did.
Yeah, she did, right? Yeah. I didn't do enough research before today's episode, but I felt confident about that. Like the game was over. And then all of a sudden did she appear on like Dancing with the Stars or something like that?
Yeah, Channel 7 or something put her on Dancing with the Stars. I was outraged. I was like, I don't know, 15 years old. And I was so angry.
Like, and fair enough too. Like, you don't see, in America, David Duke isn't on Dancing with the Stars, for God's sake. Like why are they normalising this racist, bigoted xenophobe on mainstream TV on a Sunday night? Like it was insane. And I just didn't understand, at the time, I just didn't understand how are they getting away with this? But over time, then 100%. She started appearing on the Today Show and a whole bunch of other things. And what I worry about going forward, and this is a very glass half empty kind of attitude, because first of all, Mazel Tov and congratulations on, winning on that one. That was great.
Thank you.
But I just worry that the networks will forgive and forget. And then maybe 3 or 4 years later, she'll be back on again. I'm like, oh, really? Are we doing this again?
No, for sure. I mean, the reason that they bring her on, I mean, we talked about this a lot during the campaign. She was on the Today Show. She had a paid regular spot, by the way, which, she donated her pay to charity. But still, I can't imagine she was donating it to a charity that...
Yeah, I was going to say, what charity?
Yeah. There's a lot of charitable organizations out there.
Proud Boys.
But she was there because she was saying, quote unquote, controversial things. And they were just outrageous lies. Just lies and racism and homophobia and just awful, awful stuff. But she was there for the ratings.
Yep. I know.
And the advertising dollars.
Yeah, exactly. And so those networks need to put their hand up and go, all right, that's on us.
Yeah.
That's on us. It's just like during there is power in media. Obviously, that we know that. It sounds like an idiot saying that. But during the second lockdown in Victoria, when all those protests were happening, I think ironically at the Shrine of Remembrance, where all this coalition of right-wing nut jobs, QAnons, anti-vaxxers, and I don't know what else were getting together. Channel 7 and Channel 9, they were right in there with their cameras and showing this every night. I'm like, these people are insane. Like, you wouldn't normally do this. These people do exist. We know there's, crazy people out there, right? If you've stood on a bloody polling booth on election day, you know that for sure. You've met them. Yeah. But you don't give them a frigging platform on nightly news at 6 o'clock every night. And they were doing it every night because it's ratings. It looks great because people saying batshit crazy things. And I was like, here we go again. I mean, it's a different issue. It's not racism. Well, I'm sure they were racist, but they weren't. They were making an argument against lockdowns and our freedom, all that kind of crap. But it's still, they were giving these people a platform, and that's the problem because it eventually gets out of hand.
Yeah, and I'm sure anyone listening to this who's tried to organise some sort of action in Sydney or Melbourne, imagine trying to get a camera, just any camera, to that, and get that on the TV that night. It's impossible.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Before we wrap up, is there anything else you want to talk about?
I think I wouldn't mind talking a little bit about our the campaign that we'll be launching very soon, hopefully in a month or so, but obviously community consultation comes first. So right now is a really interesting time for migration. On one hand, you've got this system in Australia that is like if we really pull it right back, it's built on this idea that people of color are your workers in the colony, and you bring them over to where you are and you get them to work for you for low or free wages, and that builds the wealth of the colony. That builds the Commonwealth. That is the idea behind migration in this like colonial, post-colonial world. That is what the Spanish, the Portuguese, the English, the French all did, and that is why these countries and empires are so well off. And Australia is part of that now in this modern age. Australia and America and Canada and New Zealand are now perpetuating that as well. And it's interesting because the people who come to now these countries are coming again from the former colonies. They're coming from places that were ravaged by the colonizers who had their wealth stolen, and are now trying in the 21st century for the individually or for their own families to build their own wealth. And we now have to go elsewhere to do that, because it is so difficult to do in your country of origin. And then you have migration as a result. And that migration system in Australia is built on so-called skills shortages. So that prioritizes middle class, upper class people. You end up with a bit of a brain drain in those countries of origin. And it also brings across people who are quite working class in sort of labouring jobs, such as farm work. Again, in a way that devalues that work. It devalues the skill, the great difficulty involved in that work. And that's seen in the way that those workers, compared to your more middle class, like doctors and scientists who are brought over, but those workers have their passports stolen, held by their employer, and they're forced to live in sort of substandard housing. And so we've got this system where you're either reliant on your employer or your partner, if you're lucky enough to be in a sort of international relationship in that way, or on the skills that you're able, like your own class privilege in your home country. And then once you get here, that's not the end of it. You're forced into this temporary visa system. The one that my parents came under, sort of the Keating government's system, and that was much simpler, much fairer. I believe, though, we need to double check, but I believe that Labor Party's now heading back towards that sort of Keating-esque, and the union movement is heading back towards that Keating-esque position. But it's a good one to take, but we also need to go further. We need to rethink what migration means when we are here on stolen land as well. We can't just keep bringing people over in a way that doesn't acknowledge what that is about as well. But like fundamentally, we need a migration system that is about self-determination. It's about dignity. It's about people being able to have their needs met and live that life where you've got your car, your backyard, a house of your own, stable job. You can raise your children if that's what you choose to do. But it's just that level of simplicity, of just such a simple life that so many people want. And when you're a citizen, you're middle class, even lower middle class, that is almost guaranteed, or you at least feel like it's within reach. But when you are a new migrant, you have to work 20 times harder to get that. And then there's that whole narrative about just put your head down and work hard. Just work hard, assimilate, make it happen. And we don't think that should be the case either. People shouldn't have to assimilate and let everything go in order to be part of this community, when we can build a really rich, vibrant, diverse country that really acknowledges people's different skills and acknowledges people's different ways of being. And so what we want to see is an end to the temporary migration system, and one that is geared far more towards permanent migration. We want to see access to services for people who are migrants. So being able to access Medicare, for example. And I mean, particularly now that we've had a global pandemic, can you imagine people not being able to access Medicare? It's just absurd. And then, of course, being able to do so with a level of dignity as well. So being able to come here, work, build a life, have a sense of security, not have to keep flying back and forth or finding money for all these visa fees and lawyers and all sorts of things. But being able to just build a life, not having to do a citizenship test, one that is, again, geared towards people from England or from the US, not one that is, it's set up so deliberately to stop people from non-English speaking backgrounds from gaining citizenship. So that's a campaign that we want to run. We know it's going to be a big one, but this is the moment for it because for the first time since the White Australia policy was abolished, there are no or very few new migrants coming here. Unfortunately, our economic system is built, Australia's current economy and wealth is built on the backs of migrants on temporary visas. And I'm actually not sure what is going to happen. And we're already seeing on farms that they can't find people to pick the fruit for those measly wages. They're talking about getting robots to do it. The rental market has shifted in places like Sydney, where there are far less international students and new migrants taking up tenancies. And what else is next? What else is going to happen? Because Australia's population is reliant on migration. And if we're not growing the population, well, what's that going to mean for the economy? So I think there's a lot of questions for us to think about as we begin to open the borders. And we definitely need those borders to open for many reasons. And in doing so, we have a real opportunity to reshape what migration looks like. We don't have to go back to the system that we had. We can have a better system that works for everyone, a system that works for all of us. And so, yeah, that's what we're gearing up for.
It's a big task, but an important task. And you are right. I mean, the sort of what we've seen is because of COVID, we've closed all our borders down. Migration has come to not a halt, but it's certainly it's a trickle. That's exactly what I was about to say. It's a trickle. I mean, for God's sake, even Australian citizens can't get back in the country because of Scott Morrison. But you're right. This is the moment. This is a perfect opportunity, and also to have some really good policy discussion to start with, to come up with some of the solutions that actually would make it a lot better for everyone and the experience of coming to a new country and settling. As a son of as a first generation Australian, it wasn't easy for my parents either. So that was the 50s. Things haven't changed too much by the sounds of it.
No, they really haven't.
How, if you're a young person, I shouldn't say young, is it strictly young? I don't know. You tell me. Yes. If you're a person of colour living in Australia and you want to get involved in democracy and colour, how do you go about it?
So there are a few different things that you can do. I'm going to say very specifically for the audience of this podcast, if you are involved with your union, which I certainly hope you are in some way or another, or if you're involved in the Labor Party, I would really love it if you could go back to your leadership, to your branch, and have this conversation about why Labor's policy position on migration is actually not that bad, but the rhetoric around it is horrendous and is actually like pre-white Australia protectionism. The Labor Party back in the 50s was pro-white Australia policy, and that is the same rhetoric that's being used now in 2021. And we don't need to win on this issue by appealing to nationalism and racism. We can win on this issue in other ways. So I think that is one really key thing that we need to talk about. The other thing is if you're a white person, the best thing that you can do is actually fund our movement. So as we've been saying, we believe that people with lived experience are the best ones to make the decisions and lead the work that needs to be done. But to do that, we need to resource it. And like I was saying before, we've just been able to hire an organising director. And so she's been able to lead on so much of this work. We know that we could do so much more if we had infrastructure like that. We're only a staff of 3 at the moment. And if we could be a staff of 5 or 6, just imagine what we could do for racial justice in this country. So you can join our Solidarity program. Simply go to our website and look for Solidarity program, $30 a month. And you get access to resources, regular trainings, and be part of a Facebook group where you can share. And it's like a safe space for white people to talk to each other about questions that you think might be silly or might be offensive. Like, that's a place to talk to each other and have those discussions. The other thing you can do is keep an eye out for when we have sort of call outs for bigger mobilizations. We're inviting people along to rallies and things like that. That's sort of open to everyone. And then if you're a person of color or First Nations person, get involved in the campaigns that we're running. We've got a migration campaign that I was just talking about. And then we've got some other sort of cool stuff that we do, like our action team are putting together zines and kind of getting involved in some arts and culture stuff as well. So there's plenty to do, and you can sign up via our website, which will put you onto our mailing list.
Excellent. What's the well, drop the website into the bio for today's episode, but just verbally, what's your web address?
Yeah, go to democracyincolor.org, and you can find us on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter.
Nice one. Néha, it was wonderful to have you on the show. You're a talent. We wish you the best of luck with the campaigns that you guys are going to embark on in 2021, and we hope to have you back on soon.
Thank you. It's a real pleasure being here.